Today's thought for the day was written by Anne O'Brien and is read by Simon Law. What do you hear? Do you ever remember your mum saying to you, "Stop doing that, do you hear me?" Or maybe if you're a parent listening to this, you've said to your children, "Please, come off that game now, it's time for dinner." And then, after a few minutes, "Did you hear me? I said, please, stop now." So sometimes we only hear what we want to hear because we want to keep on doing what we're doing. It's often called selective hearing, and to be honest, sometimes it is deliberate, but other times what we don't hear is for other reasons. I've observed, and it is quite noticeable, that different people hear different things. For example, I never hear the pigeons in our garden, but their persistent cuckoo drives my husband Terry round the bend. I never pick up on engine noises, and yet Terry will hear every motorbike, car and aeroplane, and every piece of mechanical equipment or power tool that's being used in the vicinity. On the other hand, he doesn't hear things that I hear. For example, conversations that are of interest to me, a name being called, a child crying, an advert for a clothes sale, or a familiar tune on the radio. So the reason why we hear different things is connected to our interest in them. It makes no difference to me whether it was a 650cc Suzuki bike that went past or an old bus. And I'm not really concerned whether the neighbour's using a power drill or a noisy vacuum cleaner. I'm just not tuned into those things. And likewise, Terry's not bothered about clothes or favourite songs on the radio. Actually, the radio is a good example of the point I'm making. You cannot listen. You cannot hear what you want to hear and sometimes what you need to hear unless you're tuned in. I could say to you, have you ever listened to Jazz FM? Very likely you would say, no, I don't like jazz. But how do you know if you've never tuned in and listened? So this isn't about the radio. It's about some words that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 13, verse 9. And I'm reading from a modern translation of the Bible. If you have ears and can hear, then listen. That's what he wrote. I'll say it again. If you have ears and can hear, then listen. Listen. Many children go to school every day. They sit in the classroom, and yet they learn very little because although they have ears, they haven't listened. We can't learn anything unless we listen to what God is saying. Clever teachers can engage the children's interest and get them to be active listeners. Likewise, Jesus told little stories that got people's interest so that they would engage with the message. And we need to make sure that we are engaged with what God is saying. So this is the question. Do we really listen to what God is saying? How do you listen to God? Can I tell you how it works for me? This morning I was reading a short passage from a book called Lamentations, and God spoke to me from chapter 3, verse 22, where it says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end." These are very familiar words, so I decided to look up the verse in a Bible which gave the original meaning in Hebrew, which said this: His loving kindness is never consumed, never consumed. And God spoke to me saying that we can never, ever use up all the blessings that He has for us. He always has so many more that He's waiting to bless us with, whatever our need. His loving grace is more than sufficient. And that really set me up for the day. I'm glad I tuned in to what He wanted to say to me. And then usually what I do is I just write down what I've learnt so that I'm able to go back to all the encouraging things God reveals to me. It's the same with sermons, talks at church. If someone asks us what the sermon was last Sunday, could we answer them? Were we really listening as well as hearing the words? I find that reflection is a good habit to get into. it's always beneficial to think about what we've read in the Bible or what we've heard in the sermon and reflect upon it. Think about what it means to us. And again, maybe write down a few sentences to remind us and encourage us and build us up. Psychologists say that because writing things down takes longer, it forces us to think critically about what's really worth jotting down. And this process of critical thinking can boost your memory and train your brain to take in the most important aspects of what you're listening to. In our busy world, it's easy to forget things so quickly as we move on to the next thing and the next and the next. What a shame it is if we are missing out on what God is saying to us just because we haven't fully listened and taken it in. Most of us keep meaningful letters or cards from friends and family members that have sent them. Why would we also not want to keep a record of those things that God has spoken into our lives? In Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 to 5, it says this: "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." God spoke these words to Solomon, but they are applicable to all of us here and now. If we really want to hear from God, we can every day. And that's amazing. Thank you.